Christ is risen.
Christ is risen indeed.
We say that with such conviction, and we can, because we're Easter people, and it's Easter. And we live in this hope and faith that what the apostles saw happened. And we live in a time when the resurrection has been proved many times over by many skeptics and by many believers. When I was in college, I had to write a sermon for one of my classes on the Gospel of John, and our assignment was to pick one of the other characters. We couldn't preach about Jesus, but we had to write a sermon. And I wrote about Thomas, or as we might know him as Doubting Thomas. And I wrote about how perhaps instead of judging Thomas on his doubt, we can instead see his faithfulness through his doubt. See, he was just one of the disciples that was called out on his doubt. But he wasn't the only one, because even in Matthew we hear, when they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. Not one, some. And Thomas quickly became one of my favorite disciples to think about. See, he was one of the 12. He was one of the chosen, and he was with Jesus through all of his ministry, and he continued to show up and be present. And even after Jesus died, he still was there. He was committed to his community, and yet he doubted. He had disbelief that Jesus had indeed risen, but he knew exactly what he needed to believe. But he still showed up. And just like we hear about the other disciples, their doubt didn't keep them from showing up. One of my first confirmation classes, I had a youth, and we were in a small town in Wisconsin, and she was struggling with her own identity and her faith, and she just had so many questions, and she doubted, and she disbelieved, and yet she showed up to confirmation week after week. And so we'd end up having these conversations, and we would wrestle together with her questions. And at the end of confirmation, it was time for all of the students to write their faith statements. And again, she came to me and said, "Shannon, I can't do this. I don't know if I believe, and I don't know if I can put into words what the congregation wants me to say." And I said, "Then show up and tell us what you disbelieve. Write me a statement of your doubts. Write me a statement of disbelief." She still had to go through the process, just like each one of us do, to figure out what it is that's making it hard for us to say that we believe and what makes it easy for us to say that we believe. I've come to find through some of these conversations and in looking at Thomas that maybe we need to be honest about what our doubts are. Because if we can be honest about those, maybe we can find new ways of believing and opening our eyes to see how God will show up for us. For Thomas, it was Jesus showing up and saying, "Touch my hands, feel my side." For the girl in my confirmation class, it was for her to realize that her doubts were smaller than her faith. So with doubts or not, the disciples had to go out into the world and to spread this message that Jesus had risen. And although the world hadn't really changed, it had just been a few days, maybe a few weeks or months from when Jesus had been killed, the world hadn't changed. In fact, it was probably a little bit worse. The disciples were now scared. Followers of Jesus who had just watched him be crucified had turned away. The guards at the tomb were trying to save themselves by blaming the disciples and telling lies. The government was trying to shut down all this talk of Jesus. And there were people who were out actively persecuting these people who would talk about Jesus. It might be hard to think about going out into a world that was less interested in hearing about Jesus than the society that we're being sent out to today. But our society does kind of compare to that of the disciples, doesn't it? Here in the US, we might face some of our own difficulties. Churches are being burned. People are getting killed during Bible studies. Around the world, people are at risk just going about their days, let alone going to a worship service. And whether we want to admit it or not, as soon as we claim that identity of Christian in the world, there's some things that go along with that, right? A few years ago, Barna Research asked young people to give their perceptions of what they thought of the church, of Christians. And answers were included at the top of the list of being anti-gay, being protesters, judgmental, hypocrites, and extremists. Those are just the top. And if we meet someone for the first time and they hear automatically that we're a Christian, we might automatically get clumped into their associations of TV evangelists, maybe churches like Westboro Baptist, or extremists. We might be associated with places in the news where church workers fall short, they steal money, where past priests have abused little children. We might get clumped in with people's own experiences of being hurt or broken by the church, where they were kicked out, told they weren't welcome, they felt used, or were forgotten. Or perhaps we're just clumped into the belief that the church is no longer relevant to the world outside. And then if you meet people who are Christian, it's sometimes as if there's levels of Christianity. Before I can really talk to you about faith, what are your views on the president? What are your views on abortion? What are your views on ... One of my favorite writers and speakers is also the founder of an organization called The Simple Way in Philadelphia. His name's Shane Claiborne. And he said this: "What breaks my heart is that the very thing Jesus said we would be known for, our love, doesn't make the list of things that we as Christians are known for. We've become often more known for what we're against than what we're for who we've excluded more than who we've embraced. So when we go out into this world that doesn't want to hear our message, we need to remember our why. Why are we going out? The disciples knew their why. It had changed their life. Jesus is alive. They were going out so that more people could experience and know that truth, that Jesus is alive. Has that changed our lives? Is that something that feeds us? Is that our why? What is your why? Why do you come to church? Why are you here the Sunday after Easter? And is your why important enough to share that? Now, Jesus didn't say to just go out and share the story. He said that we needed to baptize and teach people all that he commanded. There's a second step to this. When we talk about baptism, there's some promises that we make, and we talk about these are the 5 from the rite of affirmation of baptism that we did on Saturday night vigil, and that we'll do again at the confirmation on June 16th. To live among God's faithful people, to hear the word of God and share in the Lord's Supper, to proclaim the good news of God in Christ through word and deed, to serve all people, following the example of Jesus, and to strive for justice and peace in all the earth. There's more than just talking about it. And I could stand up here for hours talking about each individual person and all the things that they're doing and the things as a community that we're doing. The people at Pilgrim, I have seen our light shine collectively and individually by people embracing their baptismal callings. But like Kim said in the children's message, it's the Great Commission. It's not about just telling our stories to the people here in church. We have to go out. We need to tell the stories. We need to let our actions show so that people see them and question, how are we different? What makes you different? And leave room for people to make their own choices. And then that relationship piece, to walk alongside of them as they ask their questions, as they show up with their doubts, and give them the hope that we hear. Back in December, I get to bookend this book. It's kind of cool. So in December, I was preaching on the genealogy of Jesus. And at the end, I had pointed to today, to this passage, the Great Commission. And I said that Jesus is the King of the Jews, but he's also a hero, like Aquaman. If you remember, I compared him to Aquaman. And he was one who fought for all people to be saved. Now, there's been more hero movies, right, coming out. And there was another line that caught me. And it said, don't give me hope. And she responded and said, I'm sorry I couldn't give it to you sooner. Like Kim said, it's not always easy. because there's people all around us who feel that they're not included in that all people. The all people that Jesus fought to be saved. They need to hear that message of hope, that there's love in this world for them right now as they are. But maybe they're not ready to hear it. Maybe they don't want to hear it. See, true hope and unconditional love, they can force you to act differently. They can take away your excuses. They can make you look at your story and how you've defined yourself differently. It changes you. So, like what happened in the children's message, there may still be those few dominoes left standing. And as I've been thinking through this, I couldn't help thinking about Lee Strobel. He wrote the book called The Case for Christ in 1998, and in 2017 it became a movie. And his story was that in 1980, they were out eating, and their daughter started choking, and a nurse saved their daughter. And a simple phrase changed Leslie's life, Lee's wife. And this wasn't a coincidence, it was Jesus. And that simple phrase caused her, who was an atheist, to question, what is a coincidence and where does God come in that? Lee was a reporter at the Chicago Tribune, and he set out on a journey as his wife was on this journey of finding Jesus to debunk Christianity. He wanted his wife back. And he dug in. He didn't want it to be true. But after all of his research, Lee comes to realize that unlike Thomas and that immediate faith and proof, whether you believe or disbelieve, it's a choice, and it requires a leap of faith. I'm not going to tell you how his story ends. You should read the book or watch the movie. It's really good. There's a book called The Jesus I Never Knew by Philip Yancey, and he kind of talks about this a little bit too. And he says that perhaps the reason Jesus didn't just prove himself and show up to everyone is because if you saw the resurrected Jesus, you then lost the choice to believe or disbelieve. So instead, Jesus left the freedom to believe or not believe as a choice for every individual person. And perhaps that is why Jesus says, "Blessed are they who have not seen yet believe." So whether you doubt or believe everything, whether you're baptized or not, whether you can go out and tell everyone about what you believe or not, you have a choice to make. You have a leap of faith to take. What is your leap of faith? How will this message that Jesus is alive change you? Who are you going to tell about it? Go. Remember that God is with us always, even to the end of the age.